This is Africa 24 English, the channel that puts Africa first. Thank you for joining us. Today in this new edition of the interview, we are joined by a special guest. He is Yemi Osinbajo, former president of Nigeria. And with him, we look back at the vision of intra-African trade and one global Africa. Mr. President, welcome to Africa 24 English.
Former Vice President.
Former Vice President. You insisted on that, but you were president one day, president forever. Is that not so?
Right.
But thank you very much for being with us.
Right, thank you.
Well, let's go into our interview. In collaboration with the AFCFTA Secretariat and the AU, Afreximbank has set up a 10 billion adjustment fund to help countries participate effectively in the AFCFTA. At the end of December 2023, the bank's total assets and guarantees amounted to approximately $37 billion, and its shareholders' fund stood at $6.1 billion. In your opinion, what is the next step to be taken to make this free trade area a reality?
I think that in addition to what Afrexim has done, I'm sure you're probably aware of the guided trade initiative, which has enabled several African countries to, as it were, test the waters of the free trade area and how it operates. And that I think has been tremendously successful. About 31 countries are now involved in the GTI, the Guided Trade Initiative. And what it has shown is, first, the tremendous potential that the free trade area guarantees, but also some of the challenges and how those challenges can be surmounted. So, for example, a good number of companies participating in the GTI were under the impression that trade liberalization under the AfCFTA meant that there would be zero tariffs and then no domestic taxes at all. But obviously that's not the case, So I think that there's some of that, some of the imponderables or some of the things that they didn't think were going to happen happened. So that's helpful because, again, this was meant to be, as it were, a test run. And another thing is that for many of the smaller companies, the cost of transportation, some of the taxes were a bit too high, coming. And so, again, these are issues that need to be moderated. These are issues that need to be checked. Fortunately, again, the Afrexim has introduced PAPs, which enables us to be able to settle trade in local currencies, and also the MANSA, the digital due diligence repository, is also very helpful. So these are all components of and tools that are very helpful in advancing the cause of the AfCFTA.
Well, Mr. Vice President, these annual meetings aims to propose concrete measures to mobilize resources for Africa's structural transformation. In your opinion, what are the sectors in which there is an urgent need to invest in order to transform Africa?
I think industrialization, and in my view, especially green industrialization. At the Nairobi Africa Climate Summit, African countries under the aegis of the AU agreed that we would adopt climate positive growth, or climate positive growth as the development paradigm for African countries. The implication of that, of course, is that we will be utilizing not just our, youth population, which obviously, we're the youngest we're the youngest continent, the youngest population and all of that, but also the fact that we have tremendous renewable energy resources. We probably have, as a continent, possibly the highest in terms of potential, renewable energy potential. And then, of course, we have a considerable critical mineral potential as well, all the critical minerals, rare earth metals and all of that. We have considerable quantities of that. So the idea then is that rather than go the same carbon-intensive trajectory that the global north has gone in order to achieve high to middle income to high income status, we must go a green trajectory. We cannot go that same carbon-intensive trajectory. If we were to go the same carbon-intensive trajectory, then we'll be pumping about 9.4 gigatons of CO2e into the atmosphere all the way up to 2050. And of course, it would mean that the world will never be able to achieve its net zero objectives by 2050. So Africa needs to go green in order that the world will be able to meet its objectives. Now, in order to be able to let Africa achieve that, the world needs to invest. The global north needs to invest. So, for example, if we're processing our bauxite, where 25% of bauxite production in the world is from Africa. Now, if we process our bauxite into aluminium, right, using renewable energy, we will save the world at least 1% of global emissions, and there'll be hundreds of thousands of jobs. So this makes perfect sense, a win-win situation for Africa and for the rest of the world. So I think it's important that our industrialization initiatives, especially green industrialization, because of the opportunities that it opens up for Africa, the opportunities that it opens up, especially in terms of job creation for millions of young people.
Mr. Vice President, despite the structural challenges and severe shocks facing African countries, the economic outlook is positive. Growth is expected to reach 3.7% in 2024, underlining the resilience of African economies. How can Africa's resilience be an advantage today?
Well, resilience is always an advantage, and I think that we've proved. I think African economies have proved to be resilient over the years. But the coming years will test that resilience, perhaps in a way that has never been tested before. So we've seen some of the headwinds already. Some of them are temporary. COVID was a temporary headwind, which of course, as you know, and then the Russian invasion of Ukraine and what it meant for prices, especially food prices. But then climate change is going to be a much more permanent headwind. So there is a major now, in my view, there must be a major effort to ensure that we build in the resilience that's required to survive this headwind, especially climate change. And part of being able to solve that problem is seeing the challenges of climate change also as an opportunity. I pointed out earlier that it is an industrial opportunity. It's an opportunity for Africa to industrialize and to become perhaps the first completely green industrialized part of the world. So I think that the opportunities are there, and Africa's resilience, as I said, will be tested, but it also presents, the opportunities that the headwinds present will help us in making even greater progress if we take the advantage.
That's good to know. According to experts, Africa, comprising 17% of the world's population, commands just 4% of global GDP and the mere 2% of world manufacturing output. What can be done to increase that figure?
I think the point really is that, so if you look at all these figures, it's evident that Africa is certainly is certainly not doing anywhere close to its true potential. Now, that is on account of several different factors, and I think that some of those factors we recognize and we can deal with, But one of the critical things is that, okay, so if you look at population, for instance, and the fact that we have a very young population, that is by itself, presents a potential for, tremendous demographic dividend. it should not be, as someone had pointed out earlier, a demographic disaster. Population could be a major demographic dividend, and how so? Education. I think that, it's critical that relevant education that prepares young people for the opportunities that technology, opportunities that, the current industrialization presents, is the sort of education that we should pursue. And my view is that if we pay enough attention to preparing our young people for the future, clearly, that's what appears to just be a population growth and looming disaster if we're not careful, can actually be converted to our greatest strength. In any event, human resources are the greatest strength of any group of people. It is human beings that will make a difference. So really, you don't need natural resources as much as you need trained minds, as much as you need productive minds, as much as you need productivity in human beings, because that's really what makes a difference. So my view is that we have to spend a lot more time and a lot more resources actually working on education of young people. That for me is critical.
So in summary, you're saying that if we invest in our youth, we're increasing our future, that's it?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Right. I agree with you.
Thank you very much, Vice President, for answering Africa 21st questions.
Thank you.
Ladies and gents, here comes the end of this interview, but please stay tuned to Africa 24 English because the program continues.